So in F1 23, there is a lot of news, videos, and also help around settings. So I'm going to show you a few anyway. We've got the assist, and obviously this is all down to kind of personal preference. Obviously, again, like I say, if you are of a nature of trying out some different stuff, you obviously can go and just go with the normal elite and kind of work your way up until you really fancy a certain zone. Obviously with this, it is just bog standard for me. I'm not really too fussed with obviously all of the actual assist side of stuff, but it is more on the actual controller settings. So if obviously you've gone into settings, you can go into control, vibration, and force feedback. So the generic settings as are as standard. I believe in this one there is another option which I actually don't know where we can get it. Is the, I think it's the trigger. It's basically when you've got a controller of I think the new gen, which I believe I do, but again, I don't know where this controller is. But obviously you can have a feedback there. So basically it is vibrations when you are triggering to go forward to obviously accelerate. That one for some reason isn't on here for some reason. I don't know. But with the MDF car setup panel, there is two options now. You have got the default, which is a standard, which I think a lot of people would be using. But also you have the what is it called? The also use look around feature. And as you can see in the kind of middle right there, also use look around allows you to use the controller's right stick to navigate the MFD panel. Again, it is completely down to you for that one. Personally, I just keep it on default. Same with overtake ERS mode. I just like the way toggle is. You've got hold and toggle. Personally, it is, again, down to preference. And toggle would be, I think, what a lot of people have been using for the past few years. But the main thing is going into your controller. So obviously if you can go into here, you can edit your actual controller. So I already know I've defaulted it so I can tell you what basically it is. But this is kind of where you want to go. So if we go for the controller scheme, again, this is predominantly down to you. And I think for me, what it is mainly how you want the game to feel to yourself, but also if you identify buttons that you don't use. So I think normally quite a big one is the kind of look left, right, back and forward. Predominantly, I only use back. There's not really another reason to actually use this. So I believe if we had look left, I want to say you can unassign them, but oh, there it is, unbind them. I was going to say, I think if you go X on it like that, so if we went left, pretty much literally backwards is the only one I personally use. If you obviously wanted to change handbrake and all of them, you have either got to select, and then as you're waiting for the input, if I say I want that to be left, then obviously you can do that. If you want it to be as normal, you can just change it back and kind of have a little fiddle around yourself with that. As I think this, or at least the controller scheme, is very much down to your personal preference. If I could put everything in a complete different order and it may not feel natural to you on hand, I would say definitely give it a try, and obviously don't just do it once and then kind of think, okay, no, I don't want this. You've got to give it a couple of times to kind of warm up and see how you feel with it. So there is a lot of different ones with this. I do think for me personally, it is totally down to a kind of performance base and how you personally do it. So for instance, if we wanted to gear up and down, A and X, it doesn't feel as natural to me. I personally would go with RT and LT, which is almost, it's like using a paddle almost. It's kind of how you would use a steering wheel normally. Obviously, you'd have your kind of trigger fingers on the back to go up and down. I feel like that is a little bit better, in my opinion, than going with the buttons. And you can kind of keep the buttons then for almost your handbrake, obviously your clutch. Again, with handbrake, I sometimes like to have the two buttons there. So, for instance, with the fact that now I've moved gear up and down, I can move that across to these two. Again, we've got some down here that I just not really too fussed about. Half of the time you will just kind of just take them off personally like that, and just, it's nice and easy. Again, you've got the test buttons there, so you can go and do that also. But then the big thing for me is once you've kind of gone through these and almost just thought about how you play, what buttons you use, and kind of naturally what feels right on the actual controller, because this is predominantly controller based, you then have the calibrations. So this is where it gets a little bit more in depth for it. So you have got steering rate, dead zone, linearity, linearity, I don't know, and saturation. Predominantly, once you've kind of explained these three, you then have the same three, which it is pretty much the same. So the steering weight is the best way to kind of describe it is how quickly you turn, how quickly your actual steering wheel moves. So if you have it on 100, it is the bog standard. I always find this a little bit too low in my opinion, and I would say most definitely do not go under 100%. It just doesn't work. The car feels really lazy, and half the time you'll find that you don't have enough turning power to really do anything, especially if you are going through chicanes. It's not going to be quick enough. I would suggest, if you are looking at this, personally, I would say if you're kind of half and half with it, I'd try the 125 to kind of step up really. But I think for me, the kind of absolute sweet spot that you'll find is around the 150, and I have heard other people using 160 as well. Anything more than that, and I think it might be a little bit too quick. Like I said, this is going to be all about really learning the car and how you steer. You're going to be used to pretty much the kind of bog standard default, and this will be a hell of a lot quicker for you to be able to get that turning in, which means you have to adjust kind of how you do stuff. We find that naturally we almost go to the bog standard, and especially if that's all we use, we never change it. You want to make sure that you are putting yourself in an autonomous state. You want to make sure that you obviously are learning it very well. Dead zone, again, with these sort of stuff, predominantly the big thing with these three is if your controller's not necessarily working right, maybe there's something broken, maybe you're drifting or something like that, this is going to be the perfect time to be able to add almost an adjust to that drift, and it will kind of help out. So if you find that you have necessarily got a broken controller that you're not getting the 100% response from, then maybe adding a couple in. Personally, this is the one that I definitely test. If you have a broken controller and don't want to get a new one, then obviously test each kind of percent. I'd go up in fives and make sure that you are doing that. But personally, I normally keep that on 0. Everything else is 0, and I'll go 150 for the steering rate. And I think that has been for the past few years. It's a nice and easy one. We then also have the vibrations and force feedback. This is a great one that I think if you are using a controller, you can just turn it off. Like it is not necessarily a necessity, if you will, but I think the force feedback on it is absolutely perfect, purely for the fact that I want the experience. And yes, it's not necessarily the same as a steering wheel, but having that force feedback is absolutely spot on, just purely for the fact that you can almost feel it in your hands, and this is where the trigger would be quite interesting to see as well, because obviously with that you get to kind of feel the motion of the whole experience, drive kind of accelerating, braking, then obviously the turns, the track effects, obviously the strips. You've got absolutely everything in it, so it is very much, I would say, a well worth thing. So personally for this one, I will max out everything. And obviously, it all goes down to yourself what you kind of prefer with these. But then we also have the maximum wheel rotation, and then also the maximum rotation for supercars. Again, 900 is just a standard with this one. But with the wheel rotation, as we just read the description, the amount of rotation in degrees the wheel will allow when going from full left to full right. Personally with this, I found 180 to be an absolute sweet spot for it. Again, this one is totally down to how you drive and naturally how you kind of, if you're a very aggressive driver or necessarily you are taking it in that sort of spot where you want to get the absolute maximum speed on the turning. Because what this does is it really makes that turning a lot more quicker than obviously before. If you are going the full rotation, you'll find that you will turn in left, right a little bit on the slower side in comparison to the 180. So I personally go with 180 on that. And that is going to be my settings for you. I personally, again, go with this, all of the controller scheme as kind of a preference. If you want to kind of add something else into it, maybe you want to just change a few things around. Hands may be a little bit bigger than mine, so obviously you might cover different buttons from a very default kind of holding the controller grip, or you might have smaller hands, which obviously then you've got to adjust it as you go forward. But that's a totally adjustable thing. Obviously just select it, choose your button, it's nice and easy. And if you don't want a button, then obviously X on the button, especially on controller, and you can unassign it and obviously save it from there. But they're going to be my settings. Let me know down below if you are similar, or if there's any extra bits of nuggets you want to tell the community. Leave it down in the comment section below, and I'll catch you all for the next one. Peace.